Folks, we have finally made it to the promised land. It is trade deadline week, and the Jets have lost a few games in a row. Just two, but maybe they're starting to get a sense of what they need by Friday.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we have quite a bit to chat about. Obviously, in between a couple of Jets losses, some early trades, and, of course, rumors about what the Winnipeg Jets might be targeting, we have, a big week ahead for Winnipeg. This is potentially one of the biggest weeks in recent Winnipeg Jets history. And I'm not trying to say that with the usual overly dramatic phrasing. I'm not that kind of person, right? But I'm telling you, the stakes this week really feel at their highest for this franchise that understands right now is the moment for a cup run. I think the Jets are very aware of that, and so we're hearing a lot of different things, and I kind of want to suss out what's real, what's not, and what the Jets still need. Let's start off with the game this weekend against the Flyers, right? Did not go according to plan. I thought the Jets were going to have a relatively straightforward home victory. Unfortunately, the Jets fell in the shootout, and it was a very low-scoring game, just a 2-1 split. And, Winnipeg scored early and then struggled to actually create much of anything until the second half of the game. Philadelphia outplayed Winnipeg early, created lots of shot attempts and everything, and then the Jets started to warm up and get back into the game. But it just seemed like, the 5v5 offense was maybe a little bit snake bitten, a little bit flat. And I think that's kind of been a recurring trend in a couple of recent games. Not a lot, mind you, but a couple of recent games where, the power play has maybe finally started to hit a minor snag. I don't think it's really as bad as people think it is. I think there's just a couple of moments where maybe it's not as lucky as it usually is. Maybe, they hit a post a couple of times or whatever. So I'm not really worried about the power play. If anything, I think it's actually not the worst timing for it to happen. And it's weird to say this, but I think the Jets power play not scoring at will actually showcases something I've said about this team for a while, which is, when the special teams are not on, you really need your 5v5 offense to be at a really good level, because once you hit the playoffs, you're probably not going to get as many calls. And so for the Jets, it's really imperative that I think they look at this upcoming deadline as a way to address your 5v5 offense, because the Jets are generally pretty decent. Like, the second through fourth lines and more so the third and fourth lines, I'd say are pretty fine as is. I think they could use a little bit of finishing talent and maybe an upgrade here or two, but nothing like crazy. It's where I look at the top six and I feel like it needs, a little bit more juice. Part of the challenge is that the Jets don't really like to change things, especially with the top six. And so, you have to sort of think about creative ways around that. If the coaching staff is not willing to adjust here, then the Jets might have to do a little bit more work and find some players that could just supplant dudes in those positions by virtue of the talent and stuff. But we've all seen the Jets acquire talents before, and sometimes the coaching staff didn't always make the most of them. So, I think these games against Philadelphia, Nashville, I think they show that the Jets still need a little bit more juice. Hopefully Arneal sees it, because I feel like, with him, it's sometimes hard to read what his in-game adjustment ability is. Sometimes in the past, he's made a swap of putting Iafallo on the first line, and I just feel like he doesn't always want to change things that might honestly need to be changed. The top line, I think, has been generally fine enough this year, but the challenge is when you look at other top lines out there, fine enough doesn't really get you to the promised land. You got to have a guy, on that line who's winning battles 55 to 60% of the time. It just kind of comes with the territory. That's why you're on the top line. And some of Winnipeg's top liners do that. Like, I think, Connor this year has been a lot more of that sort of player. Shifley and Velarde can individually, but as a unit, I'm still not seeing enough from them. And so I think, it's just going to be a tough one. Connor did score in this past game, and that was great. Glad to see him kind of bust a little bit of a scoring slump for him recently. It just seems like the puck has not been finding Twine as much as it should, which is crazy because, like, Connor's one of those dudes who scores at will. So if even he's not scoring, that maybe the team's in a little bit of a shooting percentage funk. But, again, not something you're super worried about. Just I think right now it's a good time to take stock and understand that the Jets are not invulnerable. We've been riding a really good wave of vibes, 11 straight victories heading into the past couple of games. Things were feeling unstoppable, but it is important to make sure that you remember that, sure, you hope for the best, but you should always plan for the worst. And I think the Jets would be really well to adopt that mindset when coming into this trade deadline. And I think that they do. I think that they know where they're weak at. And I think that they understand that they have a couple of spots to improve upon. Getting some consistency for your third pairing probably would help on the defense. Stanley, I think, was fine in this game. That pairing worked out pretty well. Whether it's going to continue to do that, who's to say? The top four is generally pretty consistent. It's just the third pairing doesn't really have a lot of stability. And if they can find a guy who's, really powerful and maybe, not a liability on the back end for your third pairing, that would be ideal. Alexiak, I think, is the guy that I continue to come back to. A player of that caliber would help the Jets out a lot and probably be somebody that Arnia would actually want to play on the third pairing. So Winnipeg definitely has a couple of big needs. And I think it's probably not the worst that these losses happened right before the week of the trade deadline. Show the Jets that, we're still a work in progress and that there's still room for improvement. And I think it'll go a long way towards helping the Jets smash some of their expectations this year. I think Winnipeg is a lot further along than it expected to be, certainly a lot further along than I thought it would be, although that's partly due to the direction that they've chosen to go, which is more veteran heavy. And I think that's fine so long as you understand that, here's where Winnipeg was in previous runs with a veteran group. Here's where we need to get, and let's make sure that we address that this time and actually fix a couple of key problems with some of the roster construction from previous seasons. I feel better about this year than I do many other seasons. So for what it's worth, which is not a lot coming from me personally, but I just have a good feeling about this, this coming Friday. I think whatever happens, Winnipeg will probably come up with some decent upgrades. Even if it's not, like a Timo Meier level player or something, I think the Jets will still do something smart and hopefully come out with a couple of big pieces. But we all know that sometimes the Jets like to surprise us, and they may have something even bigger in store than we're anticipating. Now, amidst all of this, we have some big trades. While the Jets may be one of those teams that's kind of waiting a little closer to Friday, where most people usually make their deals, a couple of teams have already been pretty aggressively making some early moves. And I have a lot of thoughts about those. We'll chat about how the landscape has maybe changed a little bit and sort of what these trades may mean for the Jets themselves in just a brief moment. Before we go too much further, though, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. And they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. I honestly am a big fan of the shelled variety. Some of you may not like those, and if you want, they have a no shells variety, so you can just pop a few in and don't even have to worry about spitting the shells out. I kind of like the tactile crack, though. For me, it's just better. If you want to really just have it convenient, either way, they come in great little serving packs. They always have great availability of different flavors. They've got salted and unsalted. And of course, you are getting lots of complete proteins filled with 9 essential amino acids. So get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Hey friends, welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're chatting a little bit about the recent Jets stuff, and obviously some big trades have broken out recently, one as early as earlier today, formally announced earlier today, but we have a big trade for Seth Jones. Obviously, his name's been popping up recently, and I think this trade has some really interesting implications for the Jets because Winnipeg has been looking for some defensive support. And I think that there's two ways that they can go about this. You've got a Seth Jones who's a big overpaid defender, but with retained salary actually does look like a pretty good top four defender. Barring his reputation, he's improved a lot over the past couple of seasons with Chicago. And so at like 6 or 7 million, he's actually a much more justifiable trade, actually a good player in that price range. Then you've got like the Alexiaks of the world where it's more of a depth move. And Alexiak himself is a little bit pricey for what I think you get. But that may actually help the Jets if they're trying to not have to give up a lot of futures. And so looking at this deal, maybe it sets up like a blueprint for what the Jets would have to do if they wanted to go for like a Colton Parayko. Now, I've told you before, I don't think Colton Parayko is a good idea. I like Parayko like personally, but I don't like him as an org fit in terms of what it's going to take to get him and what, the risk with his contract entails, right? I think that he is a good player in like a second pairing role. I don't really see him being an elite number one defender. And, the lack of offense in this game, which may not show necessarily in the box score, but I think you saw him for Team Canada. It's really the foot speed, right? He's more of this more patient shutdown type, which is great. I just think, if St. Louis views him as a really indispensable piece now, he's going to cost you a fair bit. Seth Jones with retention ended up not being crazy expensive, but basically a first rounder from next year and Spencer Knight went one way and Seth Jones and a fourth rounder went the other way. And for, the Panthers, I think this move makes a lot of sense. Ekblad can't stay healthy. Florida knows that they needed to make moves to try and extend this cup window. They've been a little up and down this season, generally more on the positive side of things. But I think, compared to previous years where they just flat out dominated opponents, it's been a little topsy-turvy at times, right? They're still scoring a lot, but they're also conceding a fair few. For a team that scored over 200 goals, they only have a plus 33 goal differential, which is probably not as good as it could be, but it's not bad either. It's good. This is a very good team, and they've been winning a fair few games recently, so their form is starting to turn around, but I think they do want somebody who can be, a top pairing anchor, and I think in a lot of ways Jones sort of ticks that box. Would I have wanted the Jets to do this? Perhaps. I think that Jones could have been interesting if you figured Neil Pionk was moving on. But it seems like the Jets want to bring Pionk back. If I had a choice between Jones and Pionk, I'd absolutely take Jones. But I think I'd still have reservations about signing Seth, just because I feel like, acquiring him and bringing him in, he's a good player. He's just, he's there's something about his game that I feel like Winnipeg needs a little bit more juice out of. He's not, a Bufflin type, right? Winnipeg loves these big, mobile, beefy defenders, and Jones is certainly no soft player. He's a physical guy himself, but I think Winnipeg really needs something a little heavier, but still mobile, right? Somebody who can be that overwhelming force on the back end, which Jones, I don't know that necessarily describes his game. I'm not necessarily a person who really loves size, but I think it can be helpful if it's married to a mobile platform. And that's where, a Parayko, in theory, makes sense. But Alexiak, again, continues to be the guy that I circle around to and is probably more up my alley. Now, we had another trade yesterday that was also kind of interesting. The Rangers and Avs have done business, and let's just say that I kind of like what New York got out of this. So the Rangers got Parsonen and DeHaan, plus a second rounder and a fourth rounder, and sent back Ryan Lindgren, Kempf, and Vesey the other way. And with Lindgren, I think they retained like half of his contract. But really, the Avs are betting that Lindgren, in a more up-tempo, offensively inclined system, will rebound and find some of his earlier performance. But I think with this whole situation, Lindgren's probably kind of what he is. He's taken a lot of block shots over the years. And if you look at his underlying metrics, he's pretty much one of the worst defenders in the league. And I think it's the amount of injuries and damage that he sustained to his lower body probably kind of hitting his mobility. I don't want to overstate it, but I think the dude's just taken an absolute beating, and he is an absolute warrior, but I feel like that's come at a severe cost to the playing ability and the movement ability of a guy who really does have to skate a lot and has to be, one of the really strong defensive anchors for a Rangers team that, quite frankly, doesn't have that many. So things haven't gone well for him. I'm not sure I like this gamble for the Avs. VZ is a good bottom six player or middle six player. I think he certainly helps, but DeHaan is honestly a better defender. And like Parssinen, maybe he's not that great of a forward himself. Maybe he's more of a depth guy. But I just feel like for what the Avs gave up, it's a bet that's kind of, to me, a little, I'm a little mixed on it. But, the Avs have traditionally made good, smart moves. I also think that this probably is their big trade, unless there's something really surprising. Landeskog's probably not coming back, so maybe they try to work around that. But I just think the Avs don't really have much space to work with now. I think this is probably going to be the extent of their moves. Again, barring a really shocking, really big move that kind of catches all of us by surprise, pulls our attention, something really eye-catching, shocking. I still look more towards Vegas to make that level of trade. I think Colorado is probably not going to do that. One of the other trades that also kind of came through that was a little crazy, not because it's like a smash and grab gigantic blockbuster, but the pricing of it was a little funky. Gustav Nyquist got sent to Minnesota with salary retention for a second rounder. And like Nyquist, he's a solid player. I like him a lot. A second rounder for that is not good business. I honestly thought he would have gone for a third or fourth rounder, given his contract price and the lack of overall production this year. He's basically looking more like a fourth liner, although I do think that's a little deceptive. I think if he goes to the Wild, he'll probably have improved performance, but it's not like I'd give up a second rounder for that. Just not really that great of a use of assets. Minnesota, though, bless their hearts, they try. I'm not a big fan of some of the moves that they've generally made. I think that they're kind of like an all rightish team, and sure, they're certainly up there in the Central Division, but I don't really see them as a team that I particularly feel is a very strong contender or anything. So this depth move to me doesn't really move the needle. Not really one that I would worry about. But interesting that the Wild see themselves as needing to make some adjustments. I look at their team and I feel like they're just a very first round exit kind of squad, but maybe if they make another couple of acquisitions, things improve quickly. One of the last things I want to talk about that is super fascinating because it does kind of directly involve the Jets in their potential playoff picture. The Kings, apparently, according to Darren Dreger, have been linked to Mikko Rantanen. And Rantanen to LA makes a lot of sense and also has some big question marks for me. Mikko is obviously super, super talented, and Carolina, I think, would have really liked to have kept him. But, with their current situation being that Rantanen has rejected their contract offers, and there seems to be a rapid divorce coming up. Mikko, I kind of feel like is going to be on the outs here pretty soon, which if the Canes make the right trade, maybe they go for like a Byfield or something. I like that return a lot. I think that would be a very smart move. You could also try and go for a Brandt Clark. I think that there's a lot of ways for Tulsky and the Canes to come out on top here. I know Rantanen obviously is a big prize, but if you think that you can get away with a big package like the Jets did with the Dubois trade, I would kind of be calling Rob Blake and seeing if he's willing to make another mistake. I think Blake has really not done a great job as GM. And with that in mind, I think the Canes have a really good opportunity to come away with a big package, which is weird to say about a rental, but the Kings might be desperate for something, right? LA's offense is, just to give you a bit of a comparison, the Jets have scored 214 goals this year. LA has scored 166. That is absolutely a staggering difference. Nearly 70 goals difference. And for the Jets, also just shows you how good our power play has been this year. But LA is really looking for some serious offense. They don't concede a lot. Like they've conceded among one of the lowest goal totals in the league, 155. A little bit of a spoiler, but the Jets have conceded less. It actually, Winnipeg might be on track for another Jennings trophy. But, the Kings, they want offense. They want some big scoring punch. And Rantanen does kind of address that. I guess my problem with this whole thing is if you go out and get a single big player, does that really fix the rest of your depth not really having that much punch? In my mind, no. You'll become top heavy, which is not the worst thing, but I think the depth lines really aren't offering enough. And that's kind of where I feel like they need to go for multiple pieces to kind of raise the team's overall ceiling. But um, maybe Miko can really transform their offense. I just don't really see it happening. I think that he'll improve the top line significantly. I don't think it's enough to really move the needle for a team that, quite frankly, just needs a lot of help, right? Offensively, they lack, and defensively, they're very strong. So, will one skater alone be enough to move the needle? In some areas, absolutely, probably not to where you feel comfortable with them beyond, a first round or something. So, very interesting rumor. I don't know how that's going to end, but I kind of feel like if he does end up in LA, that's probably good for us, right? Because Vegas getting Rantanen is scary. So the Knights getting somebody else like Tuck, I feel a lot better about that, even if Tuck is a very good player. But curious to know your thoughts on this. Would you feel more comfortable with Rantanen going to LA, or do you still think that he ends up in Vegas? Drop your thoughts in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. In just a little bit, I did want to talk about some of the swirling rumors around the Jets because we keep hearing some of the same things. And I have my own personal feelings about how much I'm putting stock into some of these rumors, even if they're coming from big sources like Merrick. Hey friends, welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're just chatting a little bit and wrapping up a bit of a preview ahead of a big week of Jets trade action upcoming. Obviously, we'll probably see this stuff more towards the end of the week than now. But for Winnipeg, there's a real question of what are they after? And based on some of the rumors, it sounds like the Jets might be taking a more modest approach. We have heard links to Joel Armia, Jake Evans, recently Brandon Tanev. I look at all of these moves. Also Carson Soucy, if you haven't heard that name. And I look at all these moves and I feel like there's no real point to the Jets doing this. At that point, just, save your assets. Don't really go for these guys. Yes, they will provide you depth. No, it will not help you at all in terms of improving your 5v5 offense. Of this group of players, that'll also include Scott Lawton. Jake Evans is probably one of the best players because he's more of like a Lowry defensive type, but I just, for a lot of reasons, the price tag that Montreal probably wants will be not anywhere near worth what the Jets should be giving up. So for me, I don't really put a lot of stock in this. I know Merrick and others have echoed these trade names and stuff, but to me, it goes counter to what the Jets have traditionally done. Winnipeg goes for the Ninos, the DeMellos, the Monahans and Toffolis of the world. They're not really looking for bottom six depth players. They're looking for middle to top six talent that can play in elevated roles. Guys who are maybe underappreciated, perhaps a bit of a cast off. I've often said that the Jets don't do enough when it comes to younger players, but when it comes to the veterans, they have a very good eye for identifying players who are perhaps either underutilized or maybe being miscast. Now, I said I'm not personally putting a lot of stock into these rumors. It's not that I think that people aren't telling the truth. It's that if this is coming from the Jets side, what I can kind of see happening is Winnipeg is doing a little bit of a market rug pull, right? I think the Jets are very much looking elsewhere for bigger deals. I think that they are trying to suggest that they're going for these bottom six players or depth players because they want to kind of play the market here. They are looking for bigger fish. I think the Jets totally want somebody with more ability to impact guys like, again, a Niederreiter, a Nelson type, somebody who has real offensive chops to really improve this offense. I think Winnipeg knows that they are not quite at the races at 5v5. I think that they are probably looking to shake things up with the middle six. And you kind of have to because the middle six is probably the unit that's going to have to do a lot of the heavy lifting, especially with, the top line perhaps not being as good as a lot of other playoff top lines, but still not bad enough to really warrant splitting them up like we've talked about in the past. Personally, I would still rearrange them because I think, a combination of like Ehlers, Scheifele, and Velarde would be next level heading into the postseason, but I just know that that's not going to happen. We don't even see Connor, Scheifele, and Ehlers together, so I'm not really, putting a lot of stock into that vision. I think it would help the Jets a lot. I think having other line combinations that, can really give you two elite first lines would be fantastic, but I just don't see the Jets going that route. Winnipeg has, for some reason, really been unwilling to do this, and it does make it a little challenging to try and work around that because once you sort of pigeonhole yourself with certain line combinations, you then have to trade around it, and it makes the front office's job a little bit trickier. But it is what it is. I don't think we're really going to see that change. And so for the Jets, it's really imperative that they come away with a big middle six upgrade here over the next couple of days. It's why I don't really think that like an Evans, Armia, Tanev, none of these guys really move the needle. In fact, I don't even think that they're an upgrade on what the Jets already have. It would just be like injury reinforcements, and given what a lot of these players would probably cost the Jets, you might as well just call up like Anderson, Dolan, or Toninato, or one of those guys from the Moose. There's no real benefit towards trading for some of these depth dudes who may be decent, but they're not going to be an improvement over your Lowrys or your Appletons or whatever. They're just going to be more bodies to take up roster spots. And so for Winnipeg, it's really big that they go after guys who genuinely move the needle. And I think that that's still their overall vision. Tommy Novak, who scored against Winnipeg the other night on the power play, hey, I hope you like being a Winnipeg Jet, or at least in theory. Maybe we can smuggle him out of Nashville in Hellebuck's luggage or something. I don't know. But with the Jets kind of needing to swing bigger, for me, I think the Jets are doing their usual MO, which is being sneaky, not really tipping their hand. I think last year was one of the first years in a while where they kind of clearly telegraphed who they were going for and actually got that player in Monahan. This year, I expected to be more coy. It feels like the Jets are playing cards very close to the vest. I don't think that they've really tipped their hand yet. So for those of us who know how this team operates, I think we are starting to get a little bit excited that we're not really hearing anything, because that's usually when the Jets do their best work. When we know what Winnipeg is after, that's when they kind of disappoint. But I just feel like we're in for something better this year than in previous seasons. But let me know what you think. Give me your actual trade predictions, not what you are hoping for, but who you think the Jets actually will acquire, in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We will continue our trade deadline week coverage tomorrow and for the rest of the week. So see you then. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.